In the last video, I mentioned those 4 design characteristics that I think could make our courses more accessible and inclusive for all learners, regardless of whether they live with an impairment or not. And those characteristics were context, compassion, clarity, and consistency. In this video, we're going to talk primarily about context. Now, several years ago, I took more of an interest in cooking, and it turns out I really enjoyed doing it, to the point where I started to make food for other people. And as I cooked more and as I got better at it, I started to get more and more compliments from people saying like, "Oh, this is so good, this tastes amazing." And I felt a little guilty getting those compliments because most of the time, the reason that something tasted really good came down to one of the things that's on the screen right now, which is salt or garlic or aromatics or butter or heavy cream, an acid of some kind like lemon juice, a vinegar. These things on their own are disgusting. They're really gross. Like, no one's going to eat a spoonful of salt or cut off a piece of butter and just chomp it down. No one's going to eat a lemon without mixing it with something else. So on their own, these things just aren't that good, but it turns out when you put them into food, they help highlight and enhance a lot of the flavors within that dish. And that's really what context is for me. These things are sort of like the context of flavor within a meal. So if we take that a step further, context to me is sort of the information between the information that helps tie it together and give it more meaning. And this turns up a lot in educational research. For example, there's a really popular concept called chunking, which is when you take really complex topics and you break them into individual pieces. That way you don't overwhelm the audience at any given moment. Now, chunking comes with another really important concept called re-encoding, which is sort of like having the directions to put together a Lego set. Because if we are going to break things into pieces for an audience, we have to also show them how to put those pieces back together. There's another example of context that shows up pretty frequently as it relates to accessibility in digital courses, and that is alt text. Now, if you've added an image on Moodle lately, you may have noticed that you're prompted to add in the alternative text. And this is text the screen reader would read to someone who is living with blindness or a visual impairment of some kind. If we look at what alt text is meant to do, it's supposed to be that behind-the-scenes context for someone who is blind or visually impaired. Now, there are actually a lot of misconceptions about what alt text is supposed to mean and what it's supposed to function as. It's really meant to be a very short, brief description of whatever the image happens to be. One exercise I usually do with folks is I'll show them this picture of the Twitter logo, and I would ask them, how would you describe this image for alternative text? And I get all sorts of responses. Sometimes folks will say, a blue graphic bird that's facing to the right that appears to be tweeting. And really what this should be in terms of alt text is Twitter. It's the Twitter logo. It's meant to represent Twitter. So the alt text for this would be Twitter. The only time I would really change that up is if clicking that icon meant that I was sharing something to Twitter. So at that point, it's an action. So I would say, share this post on Twitter. That's what the alt text would be for that. So for alt text, it's meant to be a quick description of the image. I wouldn't encourage you to spend too much time overthinking your alt text. What I would encourage you to do is spend a significant amount of time investing in creating good captions for your images. Alt text is actually designed to be used sparingly. You may notice on Moodle that you are actually character limited so that you can't type too much. So I would save longer descriptions that provide context for the image for a caption that accompanies the image. For example, if I were providing alt text for this image, the alt text might be 2 young black women taking a selfie with a smartphone. That's a very short, brief description of what this image is. Now, that doesn't provide very much context for what it's doing in my course and why I'm using this image. So the caption that would accompany this might be something more along the lines of, members of the Millennial and Gen Z generations frequently use smartphones to save, document, and share their personal experiences with others. These practices often include capturing selfies, which are photos of themselves. These photos are often taken at places of interest or with others they have a meaningful attachment to. So hopefully you can see or hear the difference between what alt text might do, which is again that short brief description, and a larger contextual caption that would accompany an image like this. So when it comes to alt text, do include short descriptions of the image, do include text if there is text in the image that is relevant, and do include linked destinations. So in other words, if clicking that image takes you to another site, that also needs to be part of the alt text. But things that you can skip over, phrases like image of or picture of, It's already going to be obvious to someone using a screen reader that that is an image, so you don't actually need that. And you don't need descriptions of decorative images or elements on your site. In fact, you'll notice that there's an option in Moodle to check a box that says, this image is just decorative. Now, if you're having trouble coming up with alt text ideas, there is a mobile app out there that I use when I'm stuck, and it's a free app from Microsoft for iOS. It's called Seeing AI. What it lets you do is either take a photo of something or upload your own photo, and it will give its best guess at what it's looking at. Here's a quick video of me taking a photo on my camera. I'm going to use the share sheet to send it to Seeing AI. It's going to begin processing. And now it's going to let me know what it thinks it's looking at. And from a scene perspective, it actually did a really good job of generating some alt text, which is probably a person and a couple of children sitting on a couch with a laptop. That's not exactly what the image is, but it's close enough that I could easily modify this and get something accurate. Another helpful strategy to incorporate into your courses is summarizing. Now, we usually do a good job of introducing what we're about to do, but we don't always do a good job of looping back to where we've just been to provide that extra bit of context for our learners. This is really helpful to do at the beginning of a section, especially if this is a continuation of a previous section, or at the end, regardless of the situation. This also works well for meetings and not just topics within a course. It's that whole idea of activating prior knowledge. If we know that activating things that the students already know before we present new information helps them retain and learn that information a little bit better, then this is really good practice just as a baseline. But it also helps those learners who might have learning impairments or anxiety disorders, who might be feeling a little lost, understand where they are and better contextualize their space within the course. In other words, filling in those gaps really helps everyone. So those are some ideas based around context. In the next video, we'll talk a little bit about compassion, the next characteristic of design.